On the evening of August 9, 2023, Thomas Weddle settled into his favorite recliner in his Zanesville, Ohio home. At 66, the recently retired grandfather was looking forward to a quiet evening after another peaceful day of retirement. What happened next would expose a web of deception so elaborate that investigators could barely believe what they were uncovering. This is the story of how a single 911 call unraveled years of lies and how sometimes the people closest to us can be hiding the darkest secrets. Thomas Wayne Weddle was born on the 20th of July 1957 in Cincinnati, Ohio to Thomas Sidney and Ruth Ellen Weddle. He was a man who believed in hard work and helping others, values that defined every aspect of his life. After years of dedicated service, Thomas had recently retired from Kroger, the grocery chain where he'd spent much of his working life. It was also where he'd met Deborah Frazier. Thomas was a devoted father to 3 children, Olivia Denton, Jonah Weddle, and Cody Weddle. But it was his role as grandfather that truly lit up his face. He had 7 grandchildren who adored him and they shared his quirky love for cowboy boots. Thomas was described by his family as a great handyman and jack of all trades, someone who could fix anything and who was always willing to lend a helping hand. His passions ran deep. Thomas loved woodworking, creating beautiful pieces that filled his home. He was an avid nature enthusiast who spent countless hours hiking through Ohio's scenic landscapes. Music was another constant in his life, particularly the sounds of Kenny Loggins and Dan Fogelberg. He also had a particular fondness for decorating and celebrating Christmas, transforming his home each December with the same care he brought to his craft projects. Thomas lived in Zanesville, a city of about 24,000 people in Muskingum County, roughly 50 miles east of Columbus. By 2023, Thomas was living with Deborah Lynn Frazier in what appeared to be an on-and-off romantic relationship. Deborah was born on the 8th of December 1987, making her 30 years younger than Thomas. She went by Debbie to most people and they had met at Kroger where they both worked. What Thomas didn't know was the true nature of the woman sharing his home. On August 5, 2023, 4 days before what would become a murder, Deborah Frazier typed 3 words into her iPhone. How to load a gun. The next day, August 6, her searches became more specific. How to load a revolver pistol, will a gun fire the wrong ammo, and how to know what ammo your gun uses. These weren't casual inquiries about firearms. These were the desperate searches of someone who needed to understand how to operate a weapon that was completely foreign to her. On August 9, the day Thomas would die, Deborah's searchers took on an even more sinister tone. She looked up how to uncock the hammer on a revolver and what does .22 ammo look like. But it was her final search that revealed her true intentions. Worst place to get hit in the head. Thomas owned multiple firearms, including a .22 caliber revolver that he had purchased in 1990. It was a gun he knew well, one he was comfortable with. Deborah, by contrast, had to Google the most basic aspects of how to load and operate it. That evening of the 9th of August was likely no different from countless others. Thomas settled into his recliner in the living room around 9:00 p.m., perhaps watching television, perhaps just relaxing after another day of retirement. What was certain was that Thomas never saw it coming. Deborah approached him from behind as he sat in his chair. She raised his own .22 caliber revolver and she shot the man who had trusted her with a single bullet to the back of his head. It was an execution-style killing carried out by someone Thomas trusted completely. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that Thomas had any warning of what was about to happen. He died in his own home in his favorite chair at the hands of the woman he'd welcomed into his life. But killing Thomas was only the beginning of Deborah's plan. The staging began immediately. Deborah wrapped Thomas's body in bin bags and duct tape, securing everything with a comforter. She used Velcro straps to drag his body from the living room where he'd been killed to the bedroom. Deborah tore up photographs of herself and Thomas, scattering them around the apartment to simulate a home invasion. She created what could only be described as superficial mess-making. Enough disorder to suggest a break-in. But Deborah had another part of her plan that she believed would provide her with an unshakable alibi. She needed John Anderson. On the morning of August 10th, about 13 hours after killing Thomas, Deborah contacted John Anderson. Anderson was a man she had maintained a secret relationship with for 10 years. He had no idea that Deborah was living with Thomas as his romantic partner. He believed that Thomas was an elderly dementia patient and that Deborah was his living carer. She told Anderson she was upset and asked him to take her for a drive. Anderson picked her up at the Sandhurst Apartments and they drove to Dresden, Ohio. They stopped at a BP petrol station, walked at Blackhand Gorge and spent hours together. At one point, Deborah walked away from Anderson, claiming she needed to speak privately with a counselor. Anderson noticed that Deborah seemed very upset, but refused to talk about what was bothering her. She went off by herself several times during their outing. Behavior that struck him as odd but not necessarily suspicious. He had no reason to doubt that she was dealing with some personal crisis. Then Anderson dropped Deborah back at the Sandhurst apartment between 11 a.m. and noon on August 10. As far as he knew, he was helping his girlfriend work through some emotional difficulties. In reality, he was unknowingly providing an alibi for a woman whose victim lay wrapped in bin bags and duct tape in the bedroom. At 8:16 a.m. that morning, hours before she would call police, Deborah had made one final Google search. How long does GSR stay on skin? GSR has several meanings, most commonly gunshot residue. She was trying to determine how long the evidence of firing a weapon would remain on her hands. At 1:26 p.m. on August 10, 2023, Deborah Frazier dialed 911. She told the operator that someone had ransacked her apartment, that it was unlocked with stuff everywhere, and that she couldn't find her boyfriend, even though his truck was still there. Her voice sounded genuinely distressed, convincing enough that the emergency operator immediately began guiding her through safety protocols. The dispatcher urged her to back out of the apartment if there was any chance intruders were still inside. Deborah responded that she was trying to quietly get there, but didn't know if someone was still in the building. What the emergency dispatcher couldn't see was that Deborah was holding Thomas's .22 caliber revolver as she spoke. Suddenly, Deborah cried out that she could see someone. The dispatcher immediately called for all units to respond to an active home invasion at 3231 Sandhurst Drive. Then came the sound that terrified the dispatcher. A loud bang clearly audible through the phone. Deborah screamed that she had been shot, that she hadn't even been able to find Thomas yet. Deborah had shot herself in the leg with the same weapon that had killed Thomas Weddle hours earlier. The police response was immediate and comprehensive. Chief Scott Comstock arrived first, followed by Patrolman Brian Wolfe and Logan Miller. Every officer on shift with the Zanesville Police Department responded to what appeared to be a violent home invasion. Patrolman Byron Bollinger applied a tourniquet to Deborah's self-inflicted leg wound. She was crying out in genuine pain. Her performance convincing enough that the responding officers were treating this as a legitimate attack. She was transported to Genesis Healthcare System for treatment. But it was Patrolman Logan Miller who made the discovery that immediately cast doubt on Deborah's entire story. In the bedroom, still wrapped in bin bags, duct tape and a comforter, was the body of Thomas Weddle. Detective Brian Ruff took the lead on what immediately appeared to be a suspicious case. The apartment on Sandhurst Drive presented obvious contradictions. Despite claims of a violent home invasion, nothing of value was missing. Multiple firearms that any burglar would have taken were left untouched. The apartment remained orderly despite the supposed ransacking. The neighborhood canvass revealed something equally damning. No one had seen anything. Detective Gary Moore began processing security footage from multiple residences and businesses around the area. If two men had fled the scene after a violent crime, someone should have captured them. The footage showed nothing suspicious. The Zanesville Police Department checked security footage from all seat buses operating in the city that day. Again, they found nothing. The complete absence of evidence for Deborah's intruders was becoming impossible to ignore. They even got the searches she had deleted. Now, with this overwhelming evidence already in hand, there was only one question left. Would Deborah Frazier finally tell the truth? Or would she continue lying even when caught red-handed? At Genesis Healthcare System, Detective Brian Ruff walked into what would become one of the most revealing interrogations he'd ever conducted. Deborah was lying in her hospital bed, bandaged leg propped up, looking every inch the victim she claimed to be. But Detective Ruff wasn't buying it. Not for a second. He pulled up a chair and let her talk. Sometimes the best way to catch a liar is to just let them keep talking. And Deborah spun quite the tale about her day with John Anderson, their walk at Black Hand Gorge, and returning to find the apartment ransacked by two masked intruders. She was still talking about Thomas like he was alive. She had no idea what Detective Ruff was about to tell her. The detective delivered the news with brutal directness. Tom had been shot and killed. The words hit Deborah like a physical blow. The composed woman suddenly crumpled, crying into her hospital blanket with what appeared to be genuine grief. Detective Ruff watched her carefully, studying every reaction. When her crying subsided, his entire approach changed. The gentle questioning was over. He told her to look at him. She was avoiding eye contact. When he asked directly if she had something to do with Thomas's death, she denied it completely. Detective Ruff leaned forward. He'd been a cop for 20 years. He knew when someone was lying. Then came the bombshell. They'd obtained a search warrant for her phone. The color drained from Deborah's face. They knew about her searches. Now came the knockout punch. Detective Ruff asked why she'd been searching for how long gunshot residue stays on hands. At 8:16 that morning, the question hung in the air like an accusation. The detective wasn't asking questions anymore. He was stating facts. There had been no home invasion robbery. There was absolutely none. When Deborah's story started changing in real time, Detective Ruff had had enough. He told her they were past playing games. They knew she'd shot Thomas with the .22. She denied it, but he pressed on. He'd talked to killers before, he said, people who'd shot multiple victims, and they at least had the courage to own up to what they'd done. But not her. Then came the forensic evidence that sealed her fate. Her hair was in the trash bag used to cover Thomas's feet. When she tried to explain it away, saying she'd been around those materials, Detective Ruff's response was withering. He'd bought plenty of duct tape in his life, but never any that came pre-packed with hair, especially hers. Throughout the entire interrogation, Deborah never confessed. Despite overwhelming evidence, despite her story falling apart, despite being caught in lie after lie, she maintained her innocence. It was a chilling performance, cold, calculated, completely without remorse. Investigators also made another disturbing discovery. Detective Gary Moore had lifted fingerprints from a television that had been moved to Thomas's bedroom floor. When processed, the prints came back with a match. David Eugene Grantham of Tavares, Florida. The shocking revelation. David Eugene Grantham had died in February 2021 from an accidental overdose. The person who had discovered Grantham's body was his roommate, Deborah Frazier. As investigators dug deeper into Deborah's background, a disturbing pattern emerged. She had a documented history of elaborate deceptions designed to present herself as a victim needing help. In 2014, Deborah had manufactured false allegations of being attacked. In June 2023, just 2 months before Thomas's murder, she'd concocted a fictional story about being assaulted by a man in a hoodie at Dillon State Park. She had created a fake telephone number to send herself text messages pretending to be Vivian, a supposed BetterHelp counselor. The deception with John Anderson was even more elaborate. She had created a fake email address, PNC Fraudulent Claims, to impersonate bank fraud investigators. She had manipulated Anderson into leaving voicemails for Thomas, pretending to be a PNC bank agent. Deborah had systematically drained their shared bank account, leaving just $2,000 of what had been Thomas's retirement savings. When police spoke to Anderson, he was shocked to discover that his girlfriend of 10 years was living with another man as his romantic partner, not as his nurse. On August 11, 2023, just 1 day after her 911 call, Deborah Frazier was formally arrested on charges of murder with a gun specification, felonious assault, tampering with evidence, and domestic violence. Her bond was set at $2 million. On the 18th of March 2024, Deborah Frazier appeared before Judge Mark C. Flegel in Muskingum County Common Court. Rather than face trial, she pleaded guilty to murder with a firearm specification, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. Judge Flegel sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years. She will first be eligible for release on the 7th of August 2046 when she will be 58 years old. After sentencing, Assistant Prosecuting Attorney John Little praised the investigation. I think the public would be surprised to know the horsepower we have in terms of investigating crime in this county. This is a rock-solid investigation by a seasoned detective and a detective bureau that is firing on all cylinders. What makes the Deborah Frazier case so disturbing isn't just the murder itself. It's the sheer coldness of the entire plan. Most domestic murders happen in the heat of the moment during an argument when emotions boil over. This was something else entirely. This was calculated, methodical, and frankly terrifying. Think about the level of planning this required. 5 days of researching how to use a gun she'd never touched, creating an elaborate alibi using a man who had no idea she was living with another partner, staging a fake home invasion, then shooting herself in the leg while on the phone with 911. That's not desperation. That's someone who genuinely believed she could outwit everyone. What really gets to me is how she manipulated John Anderson for 10 years. 10 years of believing he was dating a nurse who cared for dementia patients. The man thought he was helping his girlfriend through emotional difficulties when he was actually providing an alibi for murder. That's a level of deception that's honestly hard to wrap your head around. And here's what I find most chilling. Even when caught red-handed, she never broke. Not once. Most people, when confronted with overwhelming evidence, eventually crack. They show some remorse, some recognition of what they've done. Not Deborah. She maintained her lies right until the end, looking Detective Ruff in the eye and denying what everyone knew was true. The David Grantham connection is something that still bothers me. Was Thomas really her first victim? The timing feels too convenient. Her roommate dies of an accidental overdose, and she's the one who finds the body. Maybe it's nothing, but given everything else we know about her, it raises some serious questions. What strikes me most is how she weaponized vulnerability. She'd perfected this act of being the victim, the one who needed help, the one who deserved sympathy. It's a terrifying reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are those who've mastered the art of appearing harmless. Thomas Weddle deserved so much better than the end he got. In the end, it was her own arrogance that brought her down. She believed her plan was foolproof, but she underestimated the thoroughness of modern investigation. Every deleted search, every lie, every piece of staged evidence became another nail in her coffin. This case should serve as a wake-up call about how well some people can hide their true nature. Deborah Frazier fooled everyone for years, her coworkers, her boyfriends, probably even herself at times. The scariest part, she's probably not the only one out there.